Good morning, Stu and Susie and Holy Trinity Hounslow. It's so great to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me. Well, why Sabbath? Why am I here telling you about Sabbath rest? Well, my journey began in 2013 on a simple prayer walk, and I often tell people I found Sabbath because I was tired. Well, that sounds obvious, doesn't it? I wasn't tired in the way you might assume. I was tired of being lonely. I was. We were living in a small coastal community called Pawleys Island, South Carolina, and from the outside, no one would have known I was carrying around a deep sense of loneliness. We were fruitful in ministry. We were living in a beautiful area, in a beautiful home. Our 2 children were thriving academically, socially, every way you can imagine. But on the inside, as I say, I was carrying around a deep ache. Well, how many of you know you can live in a place where everybody speaks the same language, and yet the way you view the world is so different that it makes you feel, well, isolated, lonely, alone, other than. And that was me. You see, I was trying to fit in to a culture that wasn't me at all. And God used a simple word, Sabbath, to teach me that I already belong. You see, fitting in is changing who we are to be accepted, but belonging is being accepted for who you are. And that simple word, Sabbath, that I heard on a prayer walk, led me to investigate, well, what is Sabbath? Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up hearing a lot of sermons on Sabbath. We kind of jumped right over the 4th commandment, almost like it was an afterthought. Or perhaps God didn't know how busy we'd be right now. But Sabbath is important because it was on God's heart from the very beginning. Genesis 2:3 reads, "Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. In the beginning, he made the 7th day." This verse is significant for 2 reasons. First of all, did you get that? That the first time God named something holy was when he attributed it to rest. The 7th day he named holy. And, sometimes we get tripped up by that word holy. We calculate it or measure holiness as some kind of spiritual hoop we need to jump through. But holiness is simply this, set apart. So when we think about Sabbath or a day of rest, we're thinking, how can we set time apart that looks different from the rest of the time we use during the week? Well, the second thing that's really important about this simple scripture verse that many of us have perhaps read numerous times is that when God created a day of rest, it wasn't because he was fully finished creating everything he would ever make on the earth, right? His imagination is immense. It wasn't that he was completely finished creating, right? But how many times have you said, "I'll rest when I get everything finished"? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I've said that many times. "Oh, I'll sit down and rest when I get the dishes done, the laundry folded, those emails culled from my inbox," right? Well, that's not God's standard. When he created a day of rest, he created it to sit back and enjoy what it was that he created. Well, Sabbath is from a Hebrew word called Shabbat. And Shabbat simply means to cease or to stop. But did you know that it also means to celebrate? It does. But sometimes we become so responsible, don't we, that we forget to enjoy God, to enjoy life, to celebrate the past 6 days and all the work that God created us to do. So how do we Sabbath? So that's the next question most people ask me. Well, how do you Sabbath? What do you do? It's all about what you do. Well, that's why I use the word rhythms of rest in the title of my book. And let me explain the difference. Sometimes when we approach Sabbath as a routine, it becomes concrete, rigid, kind of like taking medicine or putting out the rubbish. If we don't put the rubbish out on a certain day, then we get passed over and we have more to collect the next week. If we don't take medicine, then we might suffer dire consequences, right? But if we approach Sabbath as a rhythm versus a routine, something that is concrete and will have dire consequences if we break that routine, then we find more freedom in Sabbath, because rhythms are nuanced according to how we live our lives, and we all live them so uniquely. And let me tell you, I don't know about you, but I get interrupted most every day, numerous times a day. And so I want to just encourage you to think about Sabbath as a rhythm of life, not as a concrete rule that can be broken, because when you approach rest as a rule, then you also equate rest as failing, because when we're interrupted, we feel as though we failed at rest. So I don't know if you've heard this word Selah, S-E-L-A-H, or stumbled upon it in the Psalms, but it means to pause and think about that. And most of the time in the Psalms, when a psalmist uses the word Selah, and we think about pausing to stop and think of what the psalmist just says, if you keep reading forward, you'll find that often the psalmist has a change of perspective, a change of heart, a change of attitude afterwards. So in this lockdown season, when we're isolated and alone and perhaps lonely for the first time in a long time, sometimes if you think about pausing during the day, taking the things that are heavy on your heart, taking those things that are weighing you down because you're anxious or because you can't control them, or because things aren't changing in the way that you want them to or as fast as you want them to. If you were to pause and think about that before the Heavenly Father, how might He change your perspective on your current circumstances? Well, I want to use that word pause as for a mnemonic, and I'm going to assign a different word to each letter in pause, because each of these 5 things in the letters of pause can be real stumbling blocks for us when it comes to incorporating a rhythm of rest in our everyday lives. But they can also be freedom. They can provide a spaciousness when we think about them. So the first one is P is for permission. Granting yourself permission. This is the number one stumbling block that most of us have, is that we feel guilty if we take a break, if we cease and stop in the way that God created us to rest. And there's so much guilt with associating with stopping, isn't there? Well, if I don't get that done, how will I be perceived, and how will I actually perceive myself? Often we are guilt-ridden when we don't accomplish everything on our lists. And so rest somehow becomes this prize or this gift that we equate with getting things done, with accomplishment, with productivity. But God already gave us permission when He created the 7th day. He gave us permission to rest, and it's not just a permission, it's a gift to abide with Him in a different way than we do during the week. So number 1 is, are you giving yourself permission, or do you feel guilty about rest? How do you equate rest? The second word is ask. Are you good at asking for help? I haven't always been good at asking for help. Early on in my marriage, that became a little point of contention between H and I. I would assume he could read my mind. I could assume that he was reading my mind. Didn't he see all the things that needed to be done around the house? Didn't he see the furniture getting dusty? Didn't he see that the kids needed a bath? Well, I was keeping all that to myself. I just assumed that he should know those things. I wasn't asking for help. And asking for help is a way to invite people into your life, a way that says, I love you, I care about you, I trust you, and I'm inviting you to come into my life by asking for help. Even Jesus asked for help. He had 12 disciples that helped him do most of the work here on the earth. Well, you is for unique. In the same way that I'm wearing a pink top today, and maybe you're wearing a bright, vivid, rainbow-colored shirt, or if I walked into your house might be decorated in a completely different way than mine is decorated. God has created us to rest in a unique way too. So what are those things that make your heart come alive? I know for me, I love to garden. There's something therapeutic about pulling weeds. It helps untangle all the knots in my mental space, and is life-giving to me. I love flowers and plants, but if I ask my husband to do gardening with me, he's 6'4", that would be back-breaking work. That would not be a restful activity. So how does God create you to experience Him in rest? It's different for each one of us. And it could be different for each person in your home as well. Sometimes we think that our kids need to be resting in the same way that we rest, but sometimes rest for them is actually active. They might enjoy a paddle down the river, or they might enjoy kicking a ball, or just hanging out with friends. For some of us, being in community is restful. For some introverts, that feels exhausting. So how has God created you to rest? Well, S in the word pause is for simplify. I lead a group called the Sabbath Society online. It's a global community of tens of thousands of people. And the number one thing that is common to all of us, no matter what age or area of life, is that if we don't plan for Sabbath, Sabbath doesn't happen. So every day, think about how you can simplify your time so that when you land on the time you set aside to rest, it will happen. So simple things like filling your car with petrol if you're planning to use it that weekend to do something restful, or thinking ahead about what your family might eat. Go to the grocery store, create a list, think about a meal in the slow cooker that doesn't require a lot of time to clean up. These are simple things that you can do, but they require preparation on your part. So preparation is a big part of Sabbath keeping. It was from the very beginning. When Jesus was in the tomb, Mary, as the women prepared for his burial on the Sabbath, they ended up being the first to experience his resurrection the following day. Think about how your preparation might be preparation not just for the physical rest that you are going to partake of, but for the spiritual rest and the revelation, the miraculous that you might encounter because your heart is prepared to receive Christ in that time set apart for rest. Well, E is for enjoy. You know, God created us to enjoy Him, but sometimes we get so serious about our walk with Him that we forget to enjoy Him, to laugh, to do things that bring Him enjoyment as well, whether it's taking a walk and enjoying creation, or painting outside on in your garden, or whatever it might be. What causes you to enjoy God, to experience joy, whether it's being with people or being alone? Think about how you can enjoy God, and through your joy, glorify Him. Well, as we think about Sabbath rest in this lockdown season, many of you may be struggling with illness, or with loneliness, or with disappointment. Things haven't worked out the way that you had hoped. Well, a couple months ago, I have experienced that myself when I was diagnosed with a stage 3 sarcoma tumor in my body. It also did damage. I lost one of my kidneys and did damage to my vena cava, which interrupted my blood flow. I had a damage to my artery and my colon as well. And here I am, alive a few months later. I had no idea that all those years ago, when God spoke that simple word to me, Sabbath, as the answer to my loneliness, that rhythm of rest would be preparation for a hard season, a season of being isolated, of healing, Did you know that most of the healings written about in the Bible happened on Sabbath? So what could we be missing by not choosing to rest? I don't know about you, but I think with all the news headlines, with all the uncertainty in the world, more than ever, we need to know that God is with us. And that's what Sabbath is. Sabbath is God's gift to us, the way He parents us, the way He reminds us that we belong, that we're already accepted and loved, that He is present with us, that He will meet us in the everyday, in the unknown, the uncertain times, as well as those days that we can celebrate. We can celebrate Sabbath because we can trust in His goodness. So which one of those areas are hardest for you? Do you struggle with extending yourself permission to rest? Do you struggle with guilt? Do you struggle with asking other people to help you? Maybe you're somebody who hasn't even thought of rest as being unique to the way God created you, and you've just kind of pushed those thoughts aside for the sake of the everyday mundane. Or perhaps you never thought about preparing so that you could rest on a day or a time set apart for that. And perhaps you've just lost the enjoyment of God. God has become sort of something you do instead of a relationship where you can be. Well, I hope as you think about those different areas that you will now spend a little time in prayer and ask the Lord to show you which of those areas He wants to unblock so that you can begin to experience Him anew in Sabbath rest. Thank you for having me.